You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on this show Nicholas Wapshott, who is an author, a journalist, and recently came out with a book called Keynes Hayek: The Clash That Defined Modern Economics. Nicholas, a pleasure to have you.
Glad to be here.
So you've written this book about Keynes and Hayek. Could you, before we get into the details, give us a brief description of what the difference is?
Well, they were two men who lived in the first part of the 20th century. They were both economists of a slightly different sort. John Maynard Keynes turned out to be a great genius, and he was born as a mathematician, really, but he became an economist, and he transformed the economics trade, the profession, the discipline altogether. Before then, economics was a basic, almost like a business understanding of what happened when money is spent. And he transformed it into a really sophisticated discipline with many different moving parts. And so the old Marshallian, as it was called, old-fashioned economics, was transformed in 1936 by his great book, The General Theory. Friedrich Hayek came from a different tradition. He came from the Austrian school, which keeps itself much lower to the ground. It's much more interested in microeconomics, that is, in individual transactions, rather than macroeconomics, which is to look at the whole of economic activity as if from above, as a whole. And he contested John Maynard Keynes's version of events personally. He went to London in order to argue the toss with John Maynard Keynes, and Keynes, being the sort of person he was, instead of just dismissing him, took him pretty seriously, and they ended up having a wonderful scrap, which went on for the rest of their lives, which was about 16 years.
And in fact, to this day, the Keynesians and the supporters of Hayek continue to argue with one another. Keynes really believed that the government had a duty to spend money when others wouldn't, to keep the economy moving, and Hayek seemed to feel that the intervention was not only pointless, but could actually ultimately be dangerous. Is that a good summary of them?
Yeah, that's about right. Keynes was inspired by the experience in Britain of the 1920s, when there was mass unemployment. This was the decade before the Great Depression caused widespread unemployment throughout the world. In Britain, they had pegged the pound sterling, the Bank of England had pegged the pound sterling at the wrong rate, a too high a rate, which meant exports very expensive, and a lot of people were out of employment for no reason of their own. There was nothing wrong with them. They weren't lazy, they weren't unskilled, they were just structurally unemployed, and this deeply offended Keynes, who thought it was a waste of lives, and he was a very compassionate fellow, and he set about trying to work out what could be done. And he said that in the end of the day, it was only a government was large enough to both lend money to people, but also to spend if it had to. And so it was really in trying to explore the ways of curing unemployment that led him to find intellectual justification for intervention in the economy by government. And it's true, as you say, that Friedrich Hayek really just put down a flat no, saying if you start tinkering with this stuff, it'll go terribly wrong very fast.
So let's fast forward till today, because the purpose of learning this history is for people to understand their current situation, I think. How do these two different schools apply? Let's say you're actually in a very good position to discuss it, because you're a British journalist who's now living in the United States. How have these two schools of thought played themselves out in each country?
Well, it turns out to be this great debate between Keynes and Hayek is the dividing line roughly between left and right when it comes to non-social policies. So in terms of economic policies, the left on the whole believes that the government, first of all, has a duty to help its citizens if things are going wrong. And if an economy is in trouble, they feel that it has a duty to try and fix it if it can. What Keynes did was to provide the logic to say, yes, indeed, you can. What's more, it will work. The Hayekians, that is the conservatives mostly, and libertarians even more so, would say the best thing to do is to leave the free market to cure itself. Eventually, it'll all come out in the wash, the markets will clear, and when you have a government interfering in economics, in the economy, in the running of the economy, just like the government interfering in anything else, you want to keep the government out of your lives if you can, and therefore, even if Keynesianism did work, we'd rather do without it.
So what would Hayek, for example, say about the ever-increasing debt that the United States has, where it would seem that by borrowing money and then spending it vigorously, that's helping to give people a sense of security currently, although it seems in the long term the U.S. is going to have to deal with that debt. Maybe we can look at how both sides would see that.
Well, actually, I think they were both on the same page when it came to debt. The thing about Keynes was that he said there are three ways, really, that you can intervene in a market. You can make interest rates very cheap for as long as possible, which will encourage people to invest in new plant and employ people. You should cut taxation. Never mind that you might go into debt in the short run. The fact is that a government is not going to ever default on its debts. That's, of course, before we came to Greece, maybe. But he said that's not going to happen. So never mind that if you go into debt in order to cut taxation, that'll put money into people's pockets. And the third way is that in the last resort, a government should spend on infrastructure projects, things that will be needed when the economy gets back to boom times. So things like good roads, good railways, educating your workforce properly so that they can take advantage of more expensive production methods and so on. That's what you should do. But he said if you do that at the bottom of the business cycle, when people are being thrown out of work and businesses are going bust, the important thing is at the top of the market, when everybody is now back in employment, in order to head off inflation, you should start paying off the debt by taxing the people again and getting that money back. The problem with Keynesianism in practice is that it was applied by politicians, and politicians found that the business cycle and the electoral cycle got out of sync, and there are very few politicians who are courageous enough to actually pay off the debt when an election was looming. For Hayek, it was very simple, and that is you never went into debt in any circumstances. Although it's now considered a conservative notion that you should cut taxation, or at least in America, cutting taxes is considered entirely a conservative notion. It is Keynesian.
We are talking with Nicholas Wapshott, who is the author of the book Keynes Hayek, The Clash That Defined Modern Economics. He's also the former New York bureau chief of the Times of London, and he's previously appeared all over the media, everywhere from MSNBC and PBS all the way to Fox News. He lives in New York City, and he's been talking to us about the differences between how Keynes and Hayek would view the economy today. So let's look ahead a little bit. Nicholas, tell me something. In the future, based on what's going on today, and we're talking about the United States, what sort of prosperity can we hope for in terms of the way that the government is managing the money, according to either one of the two economists?
I don't think there's any doubt that the American economy will recover slowly, but surely. It may recover faster or slower, depending exactly what policies are there. But the American economy in itself is dynamic and will always increase in its productivity. That's at least in the medium term. I'm not talking I'm not talking 50 years hence, when all sorts of demographic changes and the rise of China and India and so on. But just within the next 10 years, I would have thought the American economy would do very well. In fact, the American economy right now is hauling the rest of the world out of what was a very deep recession, as we know, the worst since the days of the early 1930s. And that is evident, I think, in the way that, for instance, the Europeans, who are taking a very Hayekian view and battening down the hatches and getting all the debt repaid, they're in recession. Britain, which has taken a sort of semi-Hayekian approach to its debt and is paying down the debt, so they're not actually contributing at all to growth. And the American economy is still, albeit slowly, coming out of its own recession. If the Europeans were to take a different tack, and the British would take a different tack, and those are two very large trading groups, then the American economy would recover much faster.
If the Europeans are paying down their debt, it sounds like a responsible thing to do, meaning in the short term there's going to be a lot of austerity that people have to deal with, but ultimately, won't that make them a healthier economy?
Well, it sounds like a good idea. There's a world of difference between a kitchen table economy, where if in troubled times someone might lose their job or is not entirely sure how long their job will continue. It's not the time to go and take out a large mortgage. It's not the time to go on an expensive foreign holiday. It's not the time to go using your credit card, every weekend on blowing it on frivolity. While that's true, for a national economy, it's not the case. In Europe, I think that we're not, first of all, talking about austerity for the short term. The Germans and French, who lead the European Union, are imposing upon Greece, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Ireland. We're talking about 10 years worth of austerity. Now, in Greece right now, 1 in 3 people is already below the poverty line.
Mm-hmm.
1 in 3. This is storing up enormous trouble because already general strikes, public disorder, violence on the streets is commonplace in Athens. It's commonplace in Madrid too. In Madrid, at the moment, 1 in 4 Spaniards is already out of work before they've even started cutting public spending. 1 in 2, that is half of every of the population of people under the age of 25 in Spain is already out of work. To give them no prospect of working in the next 10 years is also storing up trouble. The last thing you want is sophisticated nations like Spain, France, Italy. It may not reach Germany, but countries as big as that, as important as that, having permanent social dissent because people are not working as they should be working. And so, yeah, it sounds a great idea. It sounds responsible to pay down the debt, but it also sounds thoroughly irresponsible to cause so much human misery when actually you can see on the streets of these countries already, before any of these cuts are taking place, that people are beyond their tolerance. They are beyond boiling point. I think that unless the Europeans actually readdress exactly how to cope with the Eurozone problems, we're going to have social disorder on a horribly large scale. And the last time we saw that back in the 1930s, it led to some of the most vicious and disgusting and poisonous regimes that the world has ever seen.
So in the past, you've also written about Margaret Thatcher, Britain's first woman prime minister. She was known for some of the more strong-armed economic decisions of a government. She denationalized many industries, and she destabilized the power of the trade unions. How do you think that she today would deal with the European economic crisis?
Well, of course, she disliked the Europeans altogether. She kept Britain out of the euro, and she was absolutely the right choice. Whatever else people might think about Mrs. Thatcher, she got that absolutely right. And thank goodness that the Brits are not involved in the euro. Otherwise, they'd be in the same sort of mess that the rest of the Europeans are in. But as for dealing with, of course, she didn't believe in debt. She she was Hayekian, by the way. She read a lot of Friedrich Hayek, and it's the thing that brought her close to Ronald Reagan. He'd also read a lot of Friedrich Hayek, and they agreed that actually you should be as sort of fiscally continent as possible. You should pay your debts off as quickly as possible. She worked actually her father owned a corner shop, and so she understood, small retail business and exactly what you had to do to match these things up, and that inspired her. It's not entirely appropriate, I think, though, to look at the whole of the economy, and that's not the best way to understand the way an economy works, and it's not probably the best way to deal with the economy. She was dealing with very specific things. She had a mixed economy where really just due to lethargy, due to a lack of clear thinking, all sorts of things that had been taken into public ownership for bad reasons or because of the war or whatever, were still in public hands. And it's unbelievable to imagine the telephone companies and the railways and road transport, freight transport, road transport, buses were all held by public companies. And so she just cleared that out. She had a sort of fire sale. She just cleared everything out and put it back into the hands of private companies. Mm-hmm. And that sort of sharpened up, undoubtedly, the way that not only those industries work, but it sort of inspired the rest of British industry to be far more entrepreneurial and to be far sharper. So actually, however, again, she wasn't very popular in the end, but every Briton should be grateful to her because she actually did sort of do a proper spring cleaning the British economy, and she put it back on its feet.
And that certainly kept them out of the euro now. We have been talking to Nicholas Wapshott, who is the author of Keynes Hayek, The Clash That Defined Modern Economics. Nicholas, we're just about out of time, but tell me in the last few seconds, how can people follow your work?
The best way, actually, is just to put my name, Wapshott, W-A-P-S-H-O-T-T, into Google, or put Keynes Hayek, and you'll find that in the first 10 entries, I sort of cornered the market in Keynes Hayek, so you'll find my stuff there. I write a regular column once or twice a week for Reuters. I write a column for the New Statesman. I have plenty of journalism on offer, and I do have a website, but if you go onto any of those sites, if you Google me, you'll find my site sure enough, because the name's rather complicated.
All right, Nicholas Wapshott, thanks so much for your time.
Great pleasure.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.